Thank you all very, very much. Let me say this by way of self-introduction. I was once discussed in Barron's magazine in the following way, which I remember very, very clearly. Quote, Reed Hundt, even more than Alan Greenspan, was responsible for the dot-com bubble and the collapse of the economy. And I'd just like to say that it's pretty clear that Alan has edged me out now. So, you know, if you wait long enough, you know, you can at least come in second in a rogues gallery contest. I'd like to say a special word of thanks to Ellie and to Jerry Levin here for being here. These are real titans academically and in business of the history of media and really shapers of the present and the future that we now see. And I'm very, very pleased to be here with you all. And Glenn, thank you very much for all that you've done here. I've heard a lot about it, especially from Fred's son. And I think you've really you're just building a tremendous powerhouse. Everything I'm going to say to you could be completely false, but it's in the nature of either a confession or an admission, whichever way you might want to describe it. And I thought that you know, enough time has passed since the events in question that I might as well go ahead in this kind of small group, which I assume means a posting on YouTube, and tell you some of the things that we really did think in the 1990s about the internet, and some of the things that I think are going to happen next week when the FCC, for the very first time ever, publishes a national plan for communications and media. It's actually been a essential characteristic of media in the United States that we have never had a plan. And we have felt that that was in the nature of our democracy and our capitalism to not have a plan. It's kind of interesting to think that now we're imitating China in this particular respect. So here goes. All nations need a common medium. A common medium has the following characteristics. It needs to reach 100% of the people. It needs to be a customary medium for all 100%. It needs to be very easy for them to use. It has to be accessible culturally. It has to be in the common language or common languages. It has to not create cultural barriers to its use. It needs to be open to participation. It needs to be good for business. It's absolutely essential that it be good for business because economic growth is supposed to be fostered by the medium, not undercut by it. It has to provide access to the government, access for the government to the people. In any big society, a common medium has to play that role. It needs to be full of news in some way, shape, form, or fashion so that the society can know what's going on. And it ought to be sufficiently local in its manifestation for people to be able to apprehend what's going on near them geographically and in local communities. And lastly, at least in the United States, it needs to be private. And that means that it's not a public-owned entity as it is in, for example, China. But in the United States, it needs to be consistent with our First Amendment and all the values around our First Amendment, which is why we want it to be private. So these are the 10 commandments or the 10 desired traits of a common medium. And in my birth year, we were in the process of declaring that over-the-air broadcast was the common medium. That year, 1948, was also the year that the integrated circuit was invented, and that particular seed has now blossomed so that next week the United States will declare that broadcast in the form of cable is no longer the common medium, and that the new common medium is broadband, which is a pretty big deal. That's probably not the way that the plan will actually read, so I thought it might be useful if I came and told you what it means, even if it doesn't exactly say that. Now, actually, the choice to favor the internet over broadcast as the common medium was initially made in a first draft form in 1994 to 1997 by some of the people who now are running the FCC, and by me and others who did not go back into the government. And it came to pass in a sort of anecdotal sense in the following way. I was nominated to be the chair of the FCC at the behest of my high school classmate Al Gore. This was a job for which I was selected on merit. It's just a coincidence that I went to high school with Gore and law school with Bill Clinton. And Clinton didn't go to tax class, and I loaned him the tax notes. But these are just coincidences. Actually, it was the same notes that I gave to Fred Goldberg, who Glenn was talking about. And Fred didn't go to tax class either, and he became the head of the Internal Revenue Service. And Clinton balanced the budget, so those were some amazing notes. I was the second choice for the job. The first choice decided that it was better to have kids and be with her husband in New York, and so the president said, "Al, I guess you have your way after all." And after only 6 months, I was confirmed. And the reason that it took 6 months is that Bob Dole decided that he wanted to have his own person on the Federal Election Commission so that that commission would have a majority that would vote to exonerate him from the campaign violations of 1988. This is the way Washington used to work. It doesn't work like this anymore. As you can see, it really works really well now. The way I look back on it, fate arranged it all so that, in fact, I would be confirmed in the same month that the internet as a commercial phenomenon was invented, which is exactly what happened. You know, people say, like, you worked awfully hard for the good things that happen in life. That's not true. I worked very hard, but the good things were really basically luck. And the luck of arriving at the FCC at the time that the internet was invented, in the sense that that was when the browser became popularly distributed, and that's when the CERN protocols, through the context of the Mosaic browser, became widely distributed to every PC literally in the world, as if overnight. You can't get luckier than that. And so I was there for about a month, and I got a call from one of Gore's people, and he said, "Come over and take a look at this." And there was his computer, and he shows on the computer a picture of the Louvre, and I said, "Well, that's really nice. I guess that's this thing called the screensaver. It's kind of cute." He said, "You don't understand. That's actually the Louvre. It's the telephone network that's carrying it here, but it's over this thing called the internet." And we would talk to a whole bunch of people about it, including Jerry, who had this vision already and was well underway in the context of we always called it the Orlando trial, but it had a lot of other ways of being described. We talked to a lot of people, and we decided in 1994 that the internet ought to be the common medium in the United States, and that broadcast should not be. And we actually did a lot of things between 1994 and 1997 to make that happen. But the fundamental thing that we did, which I didn't talk about at the time because I was afraid to, and also because we were sort of groping towards clarity in our thinking, but the fundamental thing was this. The United States had 100% essentially penetration of the telephone networks and the world's largest installed base for personal computers. I think it was about 50%, if I remember right, in that time period. And so the fundamental move that we made in government was to allow the computers to use the telephone network to connect to the internet. That's called narrowband, which is the father of broadband, and to do it for free. In other words, we stole the value from the telephone network and gave it to, not to the computer because it didn't produce any revenue on the computer side, we gave it to the society. And when I say we stole it, I mean that it was a government rule that produced this outcome. Frankly, everybody in the internet community was extremely eager to operate under the delusion that government played no role in the growth of the internet, and it suited my purpose to allow them to think that. And in many, many ways, all of this is technologically driven. more than it is government-driven. But that was a non-trivial move because the telephone networks took the view that the internet communication crossed state lines and therefore ought to be subject to a 3-cent a minute interstate access charge. And because I went to Yale Law School, I was able to form the view that the internet did not cross state lines. You can't really make this up. This happens to be true. Other things that we did at the time involved some of the more arcane regulations to those that are not steeped in the telephone system. Ellie knows, and maybe others here know as well. We arranged reciprocal compensation so that the telephone companies would pay internet service providers literally billions of dollars for terminating phone calls when no calls would ever come the other way. There were only 3 places in the world where you could make a call and never get a call back: funeral parlors, pizza parlors, and internet access providers. We made sure that internet commerce would not be taxed. There's actually absolutely no justification for that anyone could ever think of unless you were in a no-tax world, but somehow we're willing to have it be that only internet transactions fit your ideal. We had in the '96 Telecom Act a special universal service provision created called the E-rate that was uniquely designed to transfer, it is now transferred, $30 billion to connect the internet to classrooms, to a generation that now is the most internet-savvy generation of any young generation on the planet. It is the one area with respect to the internet where the United States leads. That generation that went to school from 1995 to 2010, that generation is the most internet-savvy generation in the world. And everyone in the lower income groups in that generation primarily learned about the internet in school, not at home. In fact, the internet is the first technology to have ever been introduced into education at the same speed for the poor as for the rich. We did a lot of other things. This is a little naughty. We delayed the transition to HD TV and fought a big battle against the whole idea, which we lost, but sometimes justice delayed is justice denied, and this is a case of injustice delayed was injustice denied. So we did all these things, and you could ask yourself this, and we did ask ourselves this: why did we do this? Broadcast had served the country very, very well. Broadcast, which spread like wildfire after the Second World War. Those who know the history know that it was delayed because of the Second World War. But after the Second World War, it spread incredibly quickly, and it had all the following characteristics. It was licensed to be universal. Tiny oligopolies in every city were created so that there would be enough revenue to sustain 1, 2, 3 stations. It was organized around then 3 principal networks. There was one station that actually carried all 3 networks. Just by coincidence, it was a station owned by Lyndon Johnson's wife in Austin, Texas. It was incredibly customary. People were happy with it. It was unbelievably cheap, totally ad-supported, no subscription fee. Standard setting made it very easy for industry to build the equipment and for the stations to work very, very efficiently. It was accessible linguistically. It was a different America, but culturally, by definition, the medium sought common denominators and found them across the whole society. It was open, in significant part, the history of the FCC and broadcast. I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, and I'm still raising money to be able to buy it, Ellie, but I know it's in the book. I know it's in the book. I know it's worth it. I wrote 2 books, each of which can be bought for a penny on Amazon. Whatever. They're good. Thank you. The FCC fought a primarily losing but long and slow battle to insist on openness and diversity through rulemaking for 50 years. I would actually say that most openness was accomplished through the creative genius of people like you, Jerry, and people that you knew in the industry, because the medium sought to create a huge audience. The government access was guaranteed for the most part in broadcast by tradition. It drove Bill Clinton nuts. He would have to actually call up and beg for the right. He probably called you more than a few times and beg for the right to speak to the country. But by and large, people in government got access to the populace over broadcast. It was definitely good for business, created huge brand value in the United States, was an intrinsic part of the great economic growth that ran from 1950 through to the mid-1970s. It was absolutely chock-a-block with news in its heyday. It had local news as well. The various localism rules were designed to nurture them, and some of the crudest rules, those that transferred wealth from the networks to the affiliates, were purposely designed to provide a greater pot of money on the side of the affiliates or the local stations so that they could do the job that was essentially not very remunerative of going out and getting local news. And always it was private. And it was and still is a very important thing that the government does not control any important medium in the United States. In fact, you can say this in a positive way or a negative way, but the tiny niche that has been carved out for public broadcasting represents and signifies our commitment to fundamentally private as the model for medium. So these are good things about broadcast, and they raise in my mind, they raise then and they raise even in retrospect a question about why those of at the FCC would have chosen, and we did so rather quickly, to begin to lay the framework for the selection of the internet as the common medium. So no one's asked, and you haven't really asked, but you're kind enough to be here, and I'll go ahead and tell you why we did it. First, our view about the internet was that it was not going to be a balance between local and national, but in fact was going to be the pathway for the global promulgation of American values and American technology. Now you could say, boy, that's awfully aggressive, or you could say it was patriotic, but I thought, and I think then, that's just a choice. A nation that doesn't believe in its own values, a nation that doesn't believe its values are values that ought to be shared and sold, if you will, to other countries, that's not the United States. I'm not talking about military conquest, I'm not talking about cultural imperialism, but I am talking about finding a way to get our story across to others and frankly, to have them come into alignment with our value system. And you know, for those who don't think China is pursuing that, I would say, having studied it in college and been there year after year for many years, I would say, you know, this is a competition and a battle of ideas. It should never be more than a battle of ideas, but it is a battle of ideas, and we thought the internet would be an appropriate, benign battleground in which our ideas would be able to get across to the rest of the world. Second, it fundamentally was a richer medium, text and pictures, and that therefore it was going to be an easier and better way for people to have access to information. Very important about the internet, it was at its heart, in our view, a disintermediating medium, as opposed to broadcast, which created intermediaries. And so the impulse that we had was characteristic, if I may say so, of the baby boomer generation, for good or for ill. The impulse was an anti-elite impulse. And I was at Woodstock, so I thought free was basically, if not a good business model, at least a good way to organize society. And the internet started off with what you might loosely call this state-sanctioned theft or borrowing of the telephone network without paying for any of the cost of that network. The internet, we also thought, was more than just easy to access. It fundamentally was, it is certain to be diverse in every conceivable respect, and not by dint of regulation. Diverse meaning it would be in every language and every race would be welcome, and the content would be able to be generated by people who would use any language to communicate and would choose any point of view and any kind of ownership of the content would be admissible, and any form of the content would be possible. And all of those represent discrete bodies of legal struggles with broadcast, which we thought would simply be obviated if we moved to internet as the common medium. We also thought that the internet fundamentally would be pro-democracy, and that broadcast had become a threat to democracy. More could be said about that, but I will spare you. We thought that the internet represented an expansion of individual power.